Kate Moody. Kate, starting out with a look at the economic side of further Western sanctions against Russia.
Hi, Mark. As you were mentioning there, diplomats meeting at that G7 summit in The Hague say they're getting closer to intensifying sanctions against Moscow. Those sanctions would likely focus on key sectors of the Russian economy. U.S. sanctions have already gone further than EU ones, singling out key businessmen and a major Russian bank. But Europe does have closer economic ties to Russia than the U.S. does. The EU does 10 times as much trade with Russia as the United States, and is the biggest customer for Russian oil and gas. Some European businessmen fear that they'll find themselves on the losing end.
Russia is our main client. If it's calling for tenders and purchases, that's good news for us. As long as our offers are competitive, we're in business. If Russia isn't buying, then we're not doing so well.
And in another development, as that crisis continues, France's biggest bank, BNP Paribas, says it will reduce its staff in Ukraine by 1,600 in the coming year. That amounts to some 20% of its workforce there. BNP has already been trying to reduce its exposure to instability in the region, closing 84 of its local branches last year. Now, we haven't had a lot of positive news about the French economy lately, but new data shows that the private sector here in France has been growing at its fastest pace in 2.5 years this month. Preliminary readings of the Purchasing Managers Index hit 51.6 in March. That's up from just 47.9 in February and above the 50 benchmark that indicates growth. Overall European growth slowed slightly to 53.2, but it still marks the 9th month of expansion in the Eurozone. German manufacturing did slow down a bit, but it came in strong in March. Some worries about Chinese manufacturing as activity contracted there to an 8-month low. And in the US, the PMI fell from a nearly 4-month high, down nearly 2 points to 55.5, still in growth territory there. Now, all that data did little to boost the markets. We saw red across the board here in Europe. Germany's DAX closing down over 1.5%. The MICEX in Moscow also dropping as Western powers continue to discuss those possible sanctions. That negative trend reached over into Wall Street as well. The Nasdaq in particular was being weighed down by heavy losses in the biotech industry. Shares in Google and Facebook both sliding there. Investors around the world have really been feeling anxious about that apparent slowdown in China, and particularly the ongoing turmoil in Crimea. A jury in New York has convicted 5 former employees of Bernie Madoff of helping him to carry out his Ponzi scheme. The 5 were found guilty of charges including falsifying records, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Madoff was convicted in 2009 and sentenced to 150 years in prison for running a massive fraud scheme that's thought to have lost his clients some $20 billion worth of investments. And finally, which is more precious, water or beer? It turns out you can't have one without the other. At least that's the case for some brewers in the western United States who are experiencing a drought. The dry spell is forcing many of them to come up with more creative brewing solutions. Mariam Saab has the story.
The ultimate thirst quencher on a hot day, a tall order of beer. But what happens when that hot day turns into an epic dry spell? In a matter of months, parts of California could be out of water. And no water means no beer. It can take up to 7 litres of water for every litre of beer produced. With stakes high and water levels at an all-time low, local brewery Beer Republic have a secret weapon, EcoVolt. They've seen the water-to-beer ratio drop since instituting the world's first bioelectric water treatment system, bringing new meaning to the old adage, waste not, want not.
This is electrically active microbes that quickly treat wastewater and generate really high-quality gas. We take that gas and we can put it in a boiler to offset natural gas costs, or we can put it in a cogeneration system to generate electricity and heat.
This biogas is enough to generate up to half of the brewery's electricity needs and over 20% of its heat. Encouraged by these results, others around the drought-ridden Sunshine State are starting to follow suit.
I do think it's going to be a trend, especially in places like California or Arizona that are very water stressed. This is going to be a really good solution.
Although health officials say the recycled water is safe enough to drink, it's still not being used to make the actual beer, mostly cleaning kegs and bottles. But if customers are willing to embrace the move, that could soon change, and beers made of recycled water could be the way of the future.
Looks like some people will do anything to get a pint, Mark.
Kate, I noticed you've brought no samples to the studio. That's the first thing. But it puts me in mind of an Australian song about the pub with no beer, which I'd rather hoped you'd sing for us, but I understand we have no time. Kate Moody with All the Business, thank you very much indeed. Time now for our very own Media